I would like to start off with a game. I like games, and I like audience involvement. And usually I do tours in galleries where we're smaller groups. And I'm going to do my best to accommodate a spread out audience and try to get some participation from you. It'll be different forms. I think I see some faces, some I don't. But I think I can hear you and I can see hands waving in the air and thumbs down or thumbs up, things like that. So the game I want to play is a game that I play all the time when I spend time with art. And the game, it's a title game. I'm going to show you, I think 5 or 6 random paintings. And I encourage you to jot down on a piece of paper or on your phone your own title, your own initial title for each of these paintings. It can be something very quick, like guy on a stage, or trees in a forest, or people. Whatever it is that you are seeing, jot it down. I'm going to show you these images very briefly. You're not going to get to see much. If you're looking to pierce the image with your eyes, you're not going to see much. It's just going to be your first impression. Are you ready? Here's the first one. That's it. Jot down a title, think about it. And tell you what, if you do want to shout something out, do it now. Well, the peak of hell. What more? Despair, struggle. Rock bottom. Okay, these are great. All right, next. Thank you. All right, here's the next one. Hey, baby. Good. If you want to take a moment to think about what you'd put down. And what comes to mind for you with this? Tenderness. Inspiration. Partnership. Curiosity. Peace. An artist and his lover. Intimacy. Here's a third one. What's your title for that one? Think about it. Before social media, loves a dog more than me, forced marriage. Rebound, but thinking about the other woman. Okay. Fun. All right. Here's another one. Oh, you aced the test. All right. Sometimes I think I might be thundering too loudly, so let me know if I'm hurting your eardrums. Okay. But go past what you know from art history and look at the figures. What would you call that work? Venus? I heard something about not modest? Oh, okay. Beauty. What more? The manual of how to get dry after you get out of the sea. Okay. All right. Prodigal spring. Freya. Important woman. I like that one. Okay, I think I've got, how many do I have? Yeah. Here's another one. That's it. That's all I show you. What's your title? Pinnacle. Existentialism. What's that? Dorian Gray. Okay. Yeah, you aced the test. Victory. Long journey. Yeah. I know, right? A lot of art has become memes. Yeah, thank you. So now what I want to do is I want to show these again, and I'm going to have you decide which one you like best. I'm going to make us pretend we're in a democracy where you get to have a say in this, but it's actually me who's going to decide in the end which artworks we spend time with. But you still get a chance to exercise some voice. So maybe I'm going to show them all at once right here. And when I say the number, you give a little bit of applause. Imagine you're in a gallery and you come across these 5 works. Which one of these 5 would you go to? You only get to applaud for one. 1 ballot per person. Do not stuff the ballots. All right, applause for number 1. Thank you. Applause for number 2. Thank you. Applause for number 3. I saw the 2 of you. I know who you are. Applause for number 4. Applause for number 5. All right, great, thank you. Okay, so before I begin officially, that was a little prelude. I want to ask a few questions, and I think I can see enough hands. First question is, how many of you, I'm going to ask it this way, how many of you have been on one of my tours before or read my book? I want to see hands for those who are familiar with the Touching the Art approach. Okay, I'm seeing maybe a dozen or so, a couple dozen or so hands. That's great. Looks like most of you are not. Can I get confirmation of that? Raise your hand if you don't know me from a hole in the wall. Okay, all right, great, thank you. Second question I have you read The Fountainhead? Yes, if you have, raise your hand. I want to see, and okay, thank you. And if you haven't, raise your hand. If you have not read The Fountainhead, raise your hand. All right, I want to give you a heads up. I'm going to have some very mild spoilers for The Fountainhead, but they won't be like really big plot things, but they will be kind of mild spoilers, but I hope that me sharing them with you will entice you to read it. It's my favorite novel. It's a wonderful novel, and I'll make a couple references to it. Okay, and then let's see. How do I want to ask this? One more question. When was the last time you went to an art museum? If it was over a year ago, raise your hand. All right, about half. If it was within the past year, raise your hand. Okay, so I'm getting about half and half. Some of you are intrigued by art. Now, the topic or the title is Spiritual Fuel in Visual Art. I kind of like the title, but maybe I'm not too happy with it. I'll explain maybe why later on if you want to ask me. But I've got one other big question that's more rhetorical, and that is, where do you get spiritual fuel from the arts more broadly? Okay. Yeah, all right. Music, theater, dancing, movies, TV shows maybe. There's certain TV shows that I go to. Yeah. Literature. Maybe sculpture. Okay. Most of the time, you don't go to the visual arts to find the most powerful experience for an artistic experience. You go to something that's going to sweep over you, like music, like sitting in a movie theater and watching Indiana Jones, or picking up Les Miserables and being driven by the drama of the story. Going to an art museum is not typically the way you think of getting the most powerful experience that you can from the arts. And guess what? That's been the case for me too. And I'll share a little bit of why that is. Now, some people look at me and say, hey, are you an artist? I'm not an artist. Are you an art historian? No, I'm not an art historian. And what do you have to do with the visual arts? I'm a human being. I think that's my criteria. And I think everybody here is a human being. Maybe they're in the back, I'm not sure. But, yeah, I see you. But if you're a human being, the visual arts are for you. And on the case I'm going to make this afternoon is that they can be as powerful a source of spiritual fuel as any of the other, and maybe even more than the other genres of art. Okay. So there are a couple of challenges with the visual arts. One, it doesn't talk, there's no music, it's still and passive and as great as wall decoration. When you go to a movie, you sit back, you have the story sweep over you. There's drama, you're swept up in it. When you go to a concert and listen to music like last night, or go to Nine Inch Nails or wherever you go, you are immersed and you're just swept away, and you laugh and you cry. But most people don't do that at an art museum. The most that somebody might get from the visual arts is, oh, wow, that's an image that is beautiful. Or, wow, that's an image that looks heroic. And you look at it for 5 seconds, Michelangelo's David, great, 5 seconds, and then you go have a gelato. So that's a lot of the challenge, and maybe you have that experience that when you go to an art museum, after an hour, you're like, where's the cafe? So I want to have two goals, concurrent goals here for this talk for two different audiences. For those of you that are new to what I do, this will be a taste, simply a taste of how we're going to break the surface of that painting and dive deeper into it to get to the fuel. For those of you that are familiar, this can operate as a refresher. And this can also operate as a way to help you start to integrate more of the techniques that you might be familiar with into a whole, and to see how the touching the art approach envelops a lot and connects to a lot. Now, I want to start off by telling you a little bit about myself and my journey through art, because as I told you, I'm not an artist. I had no interest in art. The very first time that I got interested in art was going to my friend Lee Sandsted's home when I was about 17, and he had just become an art history undergraduate, and he loved art, and he had his bedroom filled with posters of artworks, but there was one in particular that caught my attention, and it's the first memory that I have of being like, wow, that's pretty amazing. And that first artwork that I saw that I was riveted by was this one. And I think many of you might, I'm curious, raise your hand if you've seen this or give it a little bit of applause. Okay, I see a few hands go up. So this is one of the famous paintings by a painter I like named William Bouguereau. And it's a Venus. You might recognize like the birth of Venus. And this is unusual for me. I don't usually tell you things. But I'm telling you this because for me, the first thing I did was like ask, who is this? What is this? The thing that I was drawn to, though, was a streak of light along her body. And I love that streak of light. Now, I was 17, and wow, she's beautiful. She's hot. And that streak of light is a kind of image that I hadn't seen in the visual arts before. And I was really impressed. And eventually, Lee and I went on to a trip in Europe, and we spent some time looking at art in Europe, and I became an art history undergrad as well. See a hand being waved there. Is that for me for something? Okay. All right. So I want to share that with you because this was a very limiting experience. It was impressive for me at the time, but looking back on this, it wasn't much at all. Now, I started studying art history. And I started studying art history because I loved philosophy. I was actually 3 years undergraduate philosophy, then dropped out of philosophy department and took up art history. And I liked art because it was a philosophic representation of philosophy. You look at ancient Egypt and you look at the Renaissance and you see two very different souls of cultures. And this was my passion, art history. I remember going to Italy and seeing Michelangelo's David, and it was the event of my 21-year-old life that I was most looking forward to. I saw the David. He's 17 feet high, very impressive, and I was awed. And I walked around, and then there was a hole. I was like, what do I do next? I saw you, great. Now let me go to an art history text to find out more about you. the background story, or how Michelangelo created it, or what it means in the Renaissance and how it's a representation of humanism, or the defiance of the heroic soul fighting against oppression. I wanted something more than was in the artwork, and I felt a little bit hollow at this experience because it was not like going to the movies or reading Cyrano de Bergerac. I was feeling like I'm going away from the sculpture. I saw it for 5 seconds, and was that the experience? That was it? And so from that point forward, what I started to try to do was to figure out, how can I make a visual art experience for myself as powerful as reading The Fountainhead was? Now, I got one of the biggest clues to this from my 2-year-old niece. Now, some of you have heard one story. I'm telling a second different story. My 2-year-old niece, and this is an image of her. She was visiting me out in San Diego, and we went to the art museum. And I was carrying her on my shoulder, going through the art museum. And I'm art historian brain. And we're going around this kind of medieval art section. And I'm not too interested. It's a lot of religious art, and I'm not very fond of it. And so we're going around, and then suddenly she tugs at my shirt collar as I'm holding her, and turns around and kind of sways back and goes, "Oh." And I just keep walking. I'm oblivious. I don't know why. And then she tugs again, and she goes, "Oh." I go, all right, okay. What do you see? And we walk over, and we stop in front of this painting. And my art historian brain turns on, and I say, oh, that looks like a Pietà. Maybe 13th century, maybe Sienese. It's very roughly drawn, definitely not Renaissance or Florentine Renaissance. And she just goes, oh. And my art history brain just keeps going. I say, oh, yes, that's Mary there, and there's Jesus, the body of Jesus, and he's got the wounds of the stigmata, and I'm going through all my Bible stories and figuring out what's going on, and he's just been brought down from the cross, and Mary's weeping. She just goes, oh. And then I finally dawns on me. I ask her, Quinn, what do you see? And she says one word. She says, boo-boo. Okay, now, why is that significant? Why is that important? Because she was fundamentally looking at this artwork very differently than I was. I was looking at this as an artifact, as a representation of a culture, of a philosophy, of a time period. She was looking at it as a story of human beings. Somebody got hurt. Another person is sad. Probably the mom looks sad, and she was seeing not just the story of human beings, but one that she could relate to, being 2 years old. She was a rambunctious little kid running around scraping her knee, and her mom would come over and say, are you okay? With a sad face, very much like Mary's here. Now, from that experience and a few other experiences that coalesce for me, there are 2 important principles for appreciating art that I started to see and try to work out the implications of. Oh, there's Quinn again. There she's petting a cat there. Yeah. That's a great example of touching the art. Now, the first one is this concept, one that's used in theater and one that you naturally do whenever you go to the movies, whenever you read a novel. You suspend disbelief. You imagine that what is happening in front of you is actually happening. When you watch Indiana Jones, you're saying, okay, for the next 2 hours, this is real, and this story is real, and I'm immersed in it. I'm not thinking about Steven Spielberg not being the director for this one. I'm just watching this movie and imagining that this is really happening. When you pick up a novel, you get swept up by the characters in the story, you suspend disbelief, the disbelief that it isn't real, that it is made up. You pretend it is. And this suspension of disbelief is not something that we usually do with the visual arts. Art museums do not encourage suspension of disbelief. They are set up in an art historical way to treat every artwork as an artifact. So that's the first principle, to suspend disbelief in front of the story that you're seeing, to imagine it being real. And there are lots of tendrils of implications for this that we'll see. The second one is something that I started to figure out on my own as I tried to think about how do I approach the other arts and whether the way that I approach the other arts can apply to the visual arts. I teach literature. And when I teach literature, one of the things that I try to get my students to do is to visualize a story. And when you read a novel, the more you're able to visualize, to picture what's going on, the more you're completing the experience. If you just read Les Miserables and you did not imagine what Jean Valjean looked like at the beginning, you're missing out. You're not creating the reality that's there. You just have the words. So to complete the experience, you provide the images in your mind's eye, you provide the concepts. You provide the concretes. With the visual arts, it's the reverse. You have the images there. And to complete the experience, you provide the words. You provide the concepts. Whenever you go to an art museum, you'll see people look at an artwork and then 2 seconds later look at the plaque. It's not just because they want to see who did it, but they want words to be able to give meaning to what they're looking at. And the words are important, but what's more important is that they are your words. So, the second basic principle is not just to look at an artwork, not just to feel something, but to read the artwork, to apply concepts to the concretes, to complete that experience. Okay. So, what I'd like to do, rather than talk more about some theory, is dive into a couple of examples. And just a taste of how this approach works. And usually on a big stage like this is not the way I do it. I love going to art museums with others, as I did this morning, as I did a couple of days ago, and having a chat about what we're observing, reading the artwork together. What I'm going to do here with this bigger group is I'm going to model reading the artworks. I'm going to present to you a painting. I'm going to have a few guiding questions. If you would like to participate for yourself and write out your own reading, I invite you to do that. And then I'm going to share my reading of the artwork. And after I share two of these, what I'm going to do is I am going to draw out a couple more principles from that. So, reading number one. I'll show it to you in a moment, but if you want to get a quick sneak preview, scan this. Also, the value of scanning it is you'll be able to zoom in on the details that you want to see for the image. I'll hold this up for a few moments. I'll get a sip of water. So I asked for titles for this one. So I think somebody said The Peak of Hell. Others were, what were some other titles you had? Struggle, Devil's Lair. What is that? Meditation on the Abyss. Fantastic. Okay. All right. Great. So I'm going to ask a series of questions. I'm going to show a few close-ups. And during these series of questions, I'm not going to answer them. They'll be for you to guide you through reading the artwork yourself. And you can speak to yourself, you can write something down, but see if you can answer these questions. And then afterwards, I'm going to share what I call my reading of the artwork, which essentially was me by candlelight at midnight one night, having the artwork in front of me and writing down 15 minutes quickly everything that I could see and trying to piece together what was going on. And you'll get a sense of that. So, first question. What makes this place look dangerous? And can you find 3 details of danger in this place? Second question. I hope you notice that the man at the edge of the cliff, right? Is the man on the edge of the cliff alive or dead? Okay. Then my follow-up question, I heard a couple say alive. The follow-up question is, what do you see that makes you say that? And that would expand upon your reading. I'm going to guess he's alive too. And the follow-up question, why would he be here? Is he trying to escape? Is he exploring? Any theories, any possibilities? And I like to come up with theories and to test those theories by looking for clues that support whether or not they fit that theory. And then one more question. Will he slip down or climb up? Will he slip down or climb up? I hear a lot of assertions. For yourself, in the process of reading, ask yourself the follow-up question, what do you see that makes you say that? Okay. And then I'll throw in one more question. What do you imagine he could be thinking at this moment? Gosh, I should have gone first class. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my reading of the artwork. I'm going to make some references to The Hobbit. Do you guys know The Hobbit? Yeah, okay. I heard it one yeah, and you're all that counts. So here we go. The craggy mountains look like the dwelling of a great dragon. And though there is no visible monster, the fiery red tint of the hellscape of the many crevices suggested layers of fearsome creatures like Smaug, the dragon from The Hobbit. The farther you go back into the landscape, the more dangerous it becomes. It looks as if the great rock formations of Monument Valley have crashed in upon themselves. There is no discernible way through, and though some long streaks look like paths, looking more closely, they seem like lightning flashes, emanating from red clouds that blend into the crumbled peaks above. At the base of the mountain, hanging on the ledge, is a figure of a man alone in the vast desolation, clinging to a jutting rock over the edge of darkness. How did he get to this precarious position? Did he slip on wet rocks sprayed by the water around them, or has he been climbing upwards? If so, why would he want to come here? Is he an explorer like Ernest Shackleton, finding himself in distress in the treacherous Antarctic? Or like Frodo struggling up to climb Mount Doom in Mordor? Unlike Frodo, if you know The Lord of the Rings, this hero has no Samwise Ganges to pull him up the mountain. Our hero has to pull himself up. I'm guessing he might be pulling himself up. So, after I spend some time immersing myself in the details of the artwork, then at this point, I'll bring in the background story. I'll say, what's the title? And see if there's anything that will supplement my understanding. The painting is called Sadak in Search of the Waters of Oblivion. I've never heard of Sadak before. Anybody? Okay, no. Sadak was a young nobleman who was sent by his sultan on a quest to retrieve some of the miraculous waters of oblivion, promising that after he'd accomplished his task, he could marry his betrothed, Khalisraid. However, the Sultan wanted Khalisraid for himself and sent Sadak on this doomed quest, hoping the young man would never return. Now, that's the story leading up to this moment. This moment finds Sadak about to get to the destination of his perilous journey. You can see the waters around him. The lake lies just over the ledge, but he's not quite there yet. There's one more effort he has to make. So at this point, we've got a sense of what moment this is. I'm going to do something very important. I'm going to ask you a personal question. When have you faced tremendous physical strain when trying to accomplish your goals? Maybe you've had to get surgery and you had difficult rehab sessions. Or you're a runner and you're in your last mile of your first marathon. Or, maybe more universally, you're nearing the end of pulling an all-nighter in an important project. And you're exhausted and you still have a little bit more to go. Some of you who like the Fountainhead might remember a scene where Howard Rourke is pulling an all-nighter. So, we have this painting of an individual, a hero, struggling in the last leg of his quest. And maybe if you think of this kind of moment, you can say, Sadak, I know this moment. I've been like you. And you can draw inspiration from Sadak's struggle. Now, I've brought this image up. The mountains are below this individual. He's at the top. He's scanning the world, looking out over it. And when you have them side by side, you have what could be a before and after, a sequence. The struggle, and then the victory, as I heard somebody describe this painting. The accomplishment. In literature and in movies, you have the whole sequence of the story. The beginning, the middle, the end. The struggle, and then the climax and the resolution. And the visual arts, you only have a slice of that story. And you value that slice of the story because it is part of a broader chain of some human accomplishment, some human endeavor, some human action. I'm going to touch upon a little bit of the different ways in which the visual arts can be spiritual fuel, because I think there are many ways, but if anybody's interested, I'll delve even more into that in the question period. But I'll just tell you, a friend of mine who is a psychotherapist, she has in her office these two images side by side to show the difficulties of the struggle and the outcome that awaits you. And that kind of vision is one way that you can use the visual arts to help you, to help refuel you. All right, I want to do a second example and go into a different realm. That was a broad, metaphorical realm almost, struggle, almost universal struggle, a legendary, mythological image. This one is a little bit closer to home. Reading number 2. I'm going to ask a sequence of questions again. And I think I heard in your titles for this one, a lot of you immediately going towards the mood of the image, serenity, intimacy. But even in a painting like this, which looks beautiful, I like those streaks of light. Reading it more deeply, you'll get so much more out of it. And I'll give you that example now. So here are some questions. The first one, what are your words for the mood of this place? Second one, what are they doing? Is this an art lesson? Okay. Third question, they're obviously intimate, but just as in a good novel, you don't just say they're intimate, you show how they're intimate. What are 3 details that you see that suggest their intimacy? Here's another question. What are they primarily focused on? Is it each other? Here's another odd question. Did he come over to her, or did she go to him? If you were to push rewind on this scene. And one more question. What could she be thinking in this moment? What could she be thinking in this moment? Are you ready for my reading? Here it is. A young couple sits together, bathed in a golden light. They're intimately close, heads touching, holding hands, and her shoulders are drawn into his, but they aren't looking at each other. Their eyes are looking down at the large board he has on his knees, where he seems to be writing or drawing. Did he come over to show her something, or did she go over to him to see what he was working on? I imagine he might have been sitting in this corner by the open window, taking advantage of the sunlight to illuminate perhaps the sketches he's working on. Then she walked into the room and over to him, curious about what he was doing and wanting to be close to him. He doesn't put the board down, nor does he tell her not to disturb him. Rather, he draws his legs back so that she can pull up close to him. He tilts the board towards her, and he takes her hand, inviting her to observe what he is doing. She leans over, barely aware of the touch of his cheek on her brow, or even of his hand as her fingers loosen in his. Her attention is drawn towards what her lover is doing. The intimacy between the two here, there is intimacy between the two, but it's not at the forefront of their awareness. What she is thinking in this moment is not so much, you are wonderful, but rather, I see what you are doing. I see how you're doing it. So what is he working on that is keeping both of their attention? He might be showing her something that she'd be keenly interested in, like plans for their future home. Or he might be working on a project all his own that she might admire. In either case, he isn't presenting to her a finished gift. He is sharing something perhaps more intimate. He is having her observe his process of creation. This is not a pristinely manicured product he displays for her, voila. Rather, he invites her to see his thoughts come as he sketches. So, personal question. When have you invited a loved one to experience the work you are passionate about doing? Now, loved one is a broad term here, and often that might happen usually with a parent and a child. My dad would say, hey, come over and take a look at me working in the car and fixing the engine. But have you had this kind of moment with a romantic partner? When reflecting on this painting, I have usually connected with or empathized with the character of the man. I fondly think of moments when I've shared my work with a partner who was keenly interested. Recently, there's another question I've asked. When have you been curious about what your romantic partner works on? He let her into his world, but she came to him. So, I've started to use this painting as a kind of vision of the deep intimacy that can come from being curious about the work or the passion that your lover cares about. Here's a connection to the Fountainhead. In the novel The Fountainhead, Dominique Francois walks into her lover's studio looking forward to a romantic encounter. He isn't ready yet. He tells her to wait while he finishes an architectural project he's working on, work he loves. And as he works, she doesn't leave. She stays, sits, and watches, feeling a kind of intimate connection to him she hadn't had before. The young woman in this painting makes me want to be more aware of opportunities to get close to a loved one while they work, to form that deeper connection. Maybe this contrast helps to illustrate a disassociated connection. There is no connection here. She looks frustrated as she leans over. He has not paying attention to her at all, not inviting her into his world. He is just pleasantly oblivious with his book. The dog even looks like, why are you so dispassionately petting me? Please, look at me. It's hard to imagine a more romantic scene than in this painting. The early evening sun shining, a secluded home, a cozy corner, the smell of ripe citrus in the air, and the couple who make me think of what Romeo and Juliet might have been like in their late 20s. So to add to this mood, one thing I like to do is I like to imagine what music would go well with it. I was thinking of a Chopin ballad, maybe playing in the background to tie in with the serene mood. However, this scene imbued with romance. The intimacy between the two is understated. It's a subterranean river flowing beneath their shared moment. And the title of this painting is The Painter's Honeymoon. So, this is a painting that can either make you think about moments in your life that you've had that are like this. It can also be a different kind of fuel, one that gives you insight into what romantic intimacy can be. Or it can be a vision of what you would like to have in your life. Now, after these two examples, just a taste of reading art, I want to share with you, go back to these basic principles and draw out a couple more things that we've done. So we suspended disbelief or imagined that they're real and all the implications of that this is a real scene, the characters have thoughts, we're looking at the other senses like the smell of citrus, we're looking at the movement, there's something going on before. And I invited you to read the artwork through these prompting questions, and I shared my reading of the art. One more very important basic principle. Make the experience personal. Whatever movies you're drawn to, the books you like, they all have one thing in common. They speak to you. They reflect something in your life that matters to you, and you want to see concretized in art. The artwork is not going to tell you how to personally connect to it. You've got to think about what this person is going through and actively empathize. Ask yourself, when have I been in a moment like this? Here's a little bit more detail. If you want to take a photo of any slide, this might be the one slide. Suspend disbelief, immerse yourself in the reality of the scene. And there are a lot of different implications for that, like giving quotes, like imagining the movement, other senses, and so forth. Read the artwork. Use words, your words, to create a novel-like experience for yourself. And then make it personal. Try to personally connect to the characters, what their situation is, to the theme of the artwork, and if you want, I can talk a little bit more about the theme of the artwork in a question, what a theme in the visual arts means in the question period. So this is the basics for breaking that icy surface of a frozen artwork and diving deeper into it. Now, I want to go back to that Venus, the first one, the one that at 17 years old I thought was so amazing. But how do I approach it now? What is different about my experience now, and why do I love this painting 1,000 times more than I did when I first saw it when I was 17? I'll share with you a few guiding questions, and then my reading. Look at how beautiful the young woman in the middle of the scene is. Can you describe 3 details about her you find especially beautiful? That might be my favorite question. Now, how is everyone around her reacting to her? Which of those around her, which character seems most astonished by her and her beauty? Looking at the whole scene, what sounds do you hear? What movement do you see? Now, looking at her, she doesn't seem to be paying much attention to what's around her. What exactly is she doing in this moment? What could she be thinking about? What kind of quote would you give her? All right, here's my reading. A beautiful woman stands on a large floating seashell, like a diva on stage. She looks almost as if she's swaying to sensual music, her hips gently moving back and forth, her arms rising above her head slowly, her fingers caressing her long, cascading curls. She's surrounded by a joyous crowd of mythological creatures, tritons blowing shell horns, nymphs gazing adoringly, and little cupids swirling around her like doves let loose at a grand wedding celebration. She stands in the middle of the chaos and cacophony, nude and dazzling, with a streak of sunlight accentuating her curves like a well-positioned spotlight. But unlike a diva performing on stage, our dancer does not look at her audience. She does not seem to be aware of them. Her eyes look downward, half closed, almost as if she's waking up. What is she doing in the middle of all this adoration? As I've mentioned, the title of this painting is The Birth of Venus, and the painter is William Bouguereau, and I'm telling you that for a reason that will come up. Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, as you might know, was born from the ocean, fully formed, fully mature, and beautiful. You're also probably familiar with the most famous depiction of this birth of Venus, this painting by Sandro Botticelli. Like Bouguereau's Venus, Botticelli's beautiful goddess appears nude on a clamshell surrounded by attendants. However, in Botticelli's scene, Venus covers her nudity with her hands, while a woman on shore greets her with a cloak to help with her modesty. The reception of Bouguereau's Venus is quite different. Her audience, who are also unclothed, all gape in awe and pleasure at her beauty. No one is reaching to hand her a bathrobe. What is Bouguereau's Venus's attitude to all the adulation? She doesn't seem aware of it. She seems to be in her own world. As she awakens for the first time, she's starting to discover herself. Moving her body slowly, stretching her arms, gliding her fingers through her silky hair. She's not just waking up to the world, but waking up to herself and her beauty. And she's taking pleasure in this discovering. Okay, Here's a personal question. You know how I like these, and this one's rather personal. What are moments you've had of discovering and enjoying your own beauty? Start off more literally, perhaps when you tried on a gorgeous new dress. Maybe when you've been working out all winter and you're seeing the results you're hoping for. I remember the first time I tried on a tuxedo. And I spent a little bit of extra time than needed in front of that bathroom mirror. I looked good. James Bond good. Now, in this painting though, this really kind of private moment is situated in such a public setting. If I were being serenaded by so many, I think I'd find it difficult not to notice. But she is so unself-conscious. She looks like she could be alone in front of her mirror, but she just happens to be surrounded by a loving crowd of cupids flying around and tritons blowing horns. There's that, it's kind of trite now, but there's that saying, dance like no one is watching. And I think Venus takes it to the next level. She doesn't have to convince herself to ignore others. She already seems oblivious to them. It's the kind of state of mind I would love to try to experience more often. An unself-conscious joy in oneself. I'm going to make another connection to the Fountainhead here. That's a game I like to play. How can I connect this artwork back to the Fountainhead or any other novel? In the Fountainhead, there's a scene where Howard Rourke, the architect, sees a building he has created being erected, and he caresses the beams of this creation that is deeply personal to him. He caresses these beams in the middle of this building that's being erected, and it's a moment of unself-conscious joy. And I'll read the passage that goes along with this. There are moments when something grows within him, not a thought nor a feeling, but a wave of some physical violence. And when he wanted to stop, to lean back, to feel the reality of his person, heightened by the frame of steel that rose dimly about the bright, outstanding existence of his body as its center. He did not stop. He went on calmly, but his hands betrayed what he wanted to hide. His hands reached out, ran slowly down the beams and joints. The workers in the house had noticed it. They said, that guy's in love with the thing. He can't keep his hands off. And in this moment, with Venus, I can imagine this beautiful woman, oblivious to the fanfare, awakening to herself with curiosity and growing joy, and discovering herself and thinking, I see. This is me. This is my beauty. So when I think back to when I was 17 and I saw this painting, I said, wow, beautiful woman, beautiful style. The fundamental meaning of this artwork has drastically changed. It has become for me now a vision of the kind of joy that I hope to achieve occasionally in my life. So, what we've done is I've taken you through a taste of what reading an artwork is, and I hope you got a sense that art is not simply something beautiful to look at, nor is it simply a philosophic symbol that represents a culture or even the artist's metaphysical value judgments, but it is a story of human beings that can be as powerful if you personally connect to it as the other arts. It can be a source of potent spiritual fuel. And the task is simply for you to know how to break the surface of that artwork, to dive in and to let it flood around you. So, how do you keep going with this? And here I'll share a little bit of the work I do, and then I'll end with a couple of concrete tips for you. If you want to follow me with Touching the Art, this has been the work I've been doing for the past 15 years. For myself, and how to gain more from the visual arts, and in helping others to gain more, not just from the visual arts, but from art as a whole. I'm giving a couple of tours tomorrow of the Phoenix Art Museum. You're welcome to join me there. I've got copies of my book, Touching the Art, for sale. You're welcome to purchase. They'll be right outside. You can sign up for my newsletter. I often do online salons, free salons. I give courses. And then there is the Touching the Art app, which you can already have access to. You might have seen in one of those QR code images. Download the app. There, I've got about 60 artworks with guiding questions and my readings. If you ever want to take a break and try for yourself to immerse yourself more in art. So I'll leave you with 2 tips. 2 very concrete things the next time you go to an artwork, which should be the beginning of breaking through that surface. Don't look at the plaque. Don't find out who the artist is. Don't look at the artist's title or the museum's title. Come up with your own title. That immediately puts you into the story of the artwork and immediately gets you to come up with your own words. And second thing, give the characters quotes. Imagine what they could be thinking and saying. That, in the end, is one of the most powerful ways of bringing that artwork to life. Thank you very much. All right. Start over here.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So I started going to galleries recently, and sometimes I go with other people. And when we look at certain pieces of art, sometimes our interpretations of them are so different. Like we tell a completely different story, and we see complete opposite things. And sometimes it hurts when someone sees something that's completely opposite to what you see in a piece of art. And I'm wondering if there's a story that's in the art, or if any interpretation is as good as any other.
Okay, that's a great question. So essentially, is anybody's interpretation of the artwork as valid as the other? And if you disagree about an artwork, do you have to just go on living in animosity? Yeah, I think with any arts, with movies, with interpretations of novels and themes, you get a couple people together and they're going to disagree about it. So there's one question that I really like to ask, and it starts first with me. I want to gain certainty about what is happening in an artwork, because with certainty comes with, yes, that is true, and the emotions follow. So the question that I continuously ask myself, and I invite others to ask too, is, what is it that you see that is making you say that? Return to the artwork and ask, what is it that you see that's making you say that? Well, what are the details? And oftentimes, there are some really surprising things that happen there that are going to make you see more. I'll tell you a quick story. I was at the Frye Museum of Art in Seattle, and I was with a group of families, and there was this painting that I was excited to share. It was like a mother and a child, and the mother was really caring for the child, even though they're in a humble place. And one of the questions I asked to the families was, okay, can you spot 3 clues that show how poor they are? And I've got the clues in the back of my mind. Like one of the clues is going to be, they've got a really tiny window, just one little tiny window. Looks kind of dark in there, but there's just a tiny window. And so I prompt a little bit. I say, how many windows do you see? And I'm expecting everybody to say, just one. And then I've got this kid who says, I see 2 windows. It's like, what? I mean, I didn't say that. I backed up and I said, okay. I was like, why are you ruining my setup? All right. I just simply asked, what do you see that makes you say that? You know what he said? The light that's shining on them is coming from a window in front. Yeah. So when in any kind of, you're kind of seeing something differently, I would start with myself and say, okay, what can I learn about what I'm seeing from this other person? but then invite them to share with you what is returning back to the artwork. Now, there are only two sources where their feelings are going to come from: the artwork or something personal about them. And sometimes it's really hard to delve into what is personal about you, but it's also a great opportunity to connect with somebody. So use a moment when you have a disagreement as an opportunity to either learn more about what's going on in the artwork or to connect more with that person.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank you for this exercise. I really appreciated the approach, and I feel very lighthearted after this.
Oh.
And that's very nice. Last year, I had the opportunity to visit Amsterdam,
Yeah.
and I went to the Van Gogh Museum.
Yeah.
And that was a life-changing experience. They have this guide tour on the Van Gogh Museum where you go through like the entire history of Van Gogh and why he did all the paintings he did. And by the end, when I got to the last painting, which was the wheat field with crows,
Yeah.
they were describing how his biggest achievement in life wasn't his legacy or his artwork, but to have developed a new way to see his life. And at that point, I just like broke and started like crying, and it was like super like heart-touching and like really touching like the deepest fibers of my beings, if you want. And then I moved on to the next museum, which was the Stedelijk Museum. It's the Museum for Modern Art. And I found myself in front of a canvas just painted in one tone of red. And it was a very different experience for me, you know. Not that it was not cool, because I appreciate modern art, but it went from an experience that touches like the deeper parts of your being to just being something that's cool, honestly. So I wanted to ask you, how can you like take this approach that you're presenting to modern art? And also, what do you think has like skewed humanity away from artwork like the one we just saw?
Okay. So there's a lot there. Those are two big questions. What can you get from modern art? And then why does modern art exist? So to answer the first question, you notice that I did not show any modern art or abstract art because there's something I want to try to find in art, and that is a universal experience. A reality that we can all generally agree upon is happening, with a story that we can all generally agree upon is making sense to everybody, and something that we can see reflected in our lives. These moments, whether romantic, whether struggles, whether self-understanding, that we can identify with. With modern art, you don't have that reality that you can all agree upon. You can have either. It's the focus is on the style, on either the mood or the shapes and the colors and the arrangement of those for different purposes. Or there is a meaning that is idiosyncratic to the artist. The artist has a metaphorical meaning attached to it that you have to find out from the artist. Please, Mark Rothko, tell us more about that red blotch that you have there. And what I like is I like stories. I like to try to find a story that we can share together and have a common experience, like going to a movie theater and laughing at the jokes or crying at the end, something like that. So if I'm approaching modern art, and I worked at an art museum and I've had tasks where, okay, how do I approach modern art? One is try to identify for yourself what the mood is that you're getting from the scene and what the visual elements are doing to you. A little bit like approaching graphic design or even architecture. Mm-hmm. The second is get to know the artist. A little bit like what you had the experience with Van Gogh, where the art became more powerful for you because you bonded with the human being behind it. Get to know the human being behind the artwork that they created.
Thank you.
And then why?
That's a whole conversation.
Can I answer this in one sentence? Here's what I'll say. From my perspective, modern art, abstract art, came about as a reaction to this love of universality in stories. There was a desire to break away from the commonly agreed upon view of a story and seeing that as bourgeois commercial versus to get to the real meaning. You've got to have it come from just that one individual source. And the more mysterious it is, the better. The more esoteric it is, the more meaningful. I guess that's more than one sentence. But that's an initial, off the top of my head answer.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great talk. I'm incredibly excited about going on tour with you tomorrow at 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. 2 great slots for any of you that are not booked to join. When looking at all of these portraits, all of them had humans,
Yep.
right, in them. Now, when I'm, say, looking at a landscape painting,
Yep.
I'm imagining myself as being there.
Yeah.
And so I wanted your feedback or suggestions on how I can integrate some of your principles that you've applied towards experiencing them vicariously through the people that are in the paintings that you're examining with landscape paintings.
Yeah, great question. So how do you approach other genres of art, whether landscapes, or I'll even draw it over to still lifes where you have a bunch of fruit at a table? How do you apply what we just did to that? And the way I see landscapes or still life are within the framework of a story. A story needs a setting. That setting is a landscape. And so the way you're describing, I put myself into it, that's a good way of doing it. One other thing I like to do is I like to imagine what is the kind of scene that would happen in this wild jungle landscape? Or what is the kind of scene that would happen in this field of beautiful flowers on a spring day? And the analogy I'd use, I like to go back to movies a lot. In movies, you have establishing shots where you just see the landscape, and it sets a tone, it sets a mood for what's going to happen next. You'll have the music that's tied to that mood. And so with landscapes, you get the mood of the setting. That's the abstraction I really look for in landscapes. What is the mood? Just like with the painter's honeymoon, I asked you what's the mood of the scene. We're kind of looking at the landscape, the interior scene, but it's still the setting. With still life, these are objects that belong to somebody, that suggest that things have been going on. What were they doing? Were they having dinner? Did they just go on a hunt? And it also suggests the kind of person that was there. So a lot of times artists create landscapes as an exercise to capture light or texture and so forth. I still like to look at it as the props in a story. Mm-hmm. And some of my favorite moments, Van Gogh Museum, my favorite painting there was a still life of a big Bible and a novel by Émile Zola. And the big Bible, to tie it to Van Gogh's life, was his father's big Bible who had just died, who was an oppressive figure in his life, and the little novel by Émile Zola was Van Gogh's response to his dad. And so that still life shed a lot of light on two different kinds of characters.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about your experiences being a bit completely different, right? As just looking at art through an art historian's eyes versus looking at it through this universal perspective. My question is there an extent to which an understanding of art history and composition is valuable in also helping you understand those deeper elements? Or do you see them as two separate methods of viewing art?
So I see them as two separate things, but understanding the art historical part can help you in certain aspects, or it can be an additional value. So a lot of the artwork that I like is from 200, 300 years ago, and just knowing some historical context will help you to understand, okay, that's kind of what's going on. That's what that object is. Oh, they don't have phones back then, whatever it is. So the context can give you some understanding of the story, where the guiding light is what can help me with the story. Mm-hmm. Then, after you experience the artwork, and an analogy I like to use was when I watch a movie, I don't have a tour guide there with me in the movie theater telling me about the director's influences while I'm watching Spy Game, whatever it is. I wait for that afterwards. Afterwards, like, oh, that was great. Okay, how did they do this? Oh, how important was this movie? And then I go and find out more about the background. But there's one particular kind of background that I like art historical. I spent a lot of time thinking about how I approach art history. And it's tied into the questioner who talked about Van Gogh. These artworks are created by an individual human being, and if you see a lot of them, you start to get a sense of who they are. So what interests me art historically is especially biography and getting a sense of the spirit of this person. So I've given courses called Bonding with Great Artists, where you are not just getting to, for yourself personally, connecting to the stories, but you start there. You start there, but afterwards you say, what kind of human being created this? And are they my friend? Is this somebody whose worldview that I want to be around? Or sometimes, like the devil and the angel, if you have a Goya who's very dark on the one side, that's his worldview, how he might perceive certain things, or then you have Van Gogh who might be a little bit lighter on the other side. So biography is the aspect of art history I especially like. But there are also other things, but that takes us into history rather than art experience. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Gabriel.
Hi, Gabriel.
My question is about the reading, because in the first painting, before you told me the title, from the guy.
Sadak in the Waters of Oblivion?
Yes. When I saw it, first of all, it didn't look like he chose to be there.
Yeah.
When I saw it, it conveyed me to maybe it was an accident, took me to a situation like maybe a horrible situation that for accident you found yourself in, maybe a loved one died, maybe you got fired through a horrible situation. And the painting didn't look very hopeful at all. So if I had to guess, I would guess that the guy would fall, not get up.
Yeah.
But when you told me the title, it was a story about a guy who chose to be there for some possible reward in the future. And despite the direness of the situation, there was some light at the end of the tunnel because of the story that the painting was conveying when you told the title.
Okay, I didn't catch the last part there. Despite the dire situation,
there was light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Right? So the question is, knowing the title completely changed what the painting was supposed to be talking about. Do I stick to my previous observation, or do I was looking at it wrong? That's not what this painting is about. I have to change how I see it.
So I'll tell you this. Don't let the title be the judgment of what you're seeing in the artwork. Let the artwork be the judgment of what you're seeing in the artwork. So you're describing, you saw Sadak, you saw the figure as hopeless, he was going to fall, he didn't want to be there, and then, wow, suddenly there's a title that has a background story that utterly changes it. There are a lot of artworks, actually, whose background story don't fit with what's going on in the scene. The question that I'd ask myself is the same question for the questioner. How do you reconcile two people who are going at odds with each other? My question for you is, what did you see in the artwork that made you think of it being hopeless? And then it's not a test or a debate or a defense in a jury trial. It's actually a question that helps you to immerse yourself and to try to figure out what's going on more, either enriching the details or like a mystery novel, you discover a new clue that suggests something more. So I would say, for me today, this is not the ideal situation because I'm kind of modeling. Here's my view of the artwork without the conversation and the back and forth. But when you're having that conversation back and forth, if we were having that dialogue, first of all, between us, it would be fascinating to see, what are the details that you're seeing, but we would always reorient ourselves back to the artwork to see what's going on. And then when we bring the title in and say, you know what I often do? Is I say, yeah, that fits. Or no, what the heck? That does not match at all what my experience was. The background story is, for me, is secondary to the experience and the objective experience as much as possible in your process. To be objective, to look for certainty, to look for the evidence, to look for the clues that help it. But make that, it's not a subjective experience. It's yours, but it's subjective. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
I think I may disagree with you on one thing, and that's when you said, I'm not an artist. But then when I hear, your interpretations, And if this is, throughout your book, the words you're able to use to sort of craft this new experience, your use of metaphor and figurative language, I think that does make you an artist. And I think it makes you an art teacher by teaching us how to use those same tools in order to create this new experience. And from that, I guess you studied philosophy for a few years before going down this art path. What is art? Do you have an idea, a definition that you've come up with that means something to you?
Oh, thank you for the kind words. And what is art? So I bet you're familiar with Ayn Rand's definition. Art is a recreation of reality according to an artist's metaphysical value judgments. And I'm still working my way through that definition. And if somebody asks me, okay, if you saw Timothy Senefleur's talk on Frank Lloyd Wright, he made the statement that Frank Lloyd Wright is the greatest American visual artist. Thank you, 5 minutes. And to some extent, yeah, I would say sure. But the way that I approach art is I don't just simply look at the visual elements, I look at the reality created. So my definition of art is more, there is a reality or a story that you're seeing that you can connect to that gives some special insight to your life. I think that's what I'd go with. There is some special insight that is there that's condensed down, that this is meaningful, and it's packaged in a way that you can experience it as real. Thanks for the question.
First of all, thank you. Your talk was valuable to me. You're probably well aware of the Romantic Manifesto, I guess. Yeah. So my question would be, even though you like historical and not focused on current art, could you name me some natural romantic artists you think are inspiring or like mentionable from an objectivist perspective?
Yeah. So first suggestion I'll make is download the app, and then there's a tab you can click on which will have a list of the artists, a filter through by artists, and you'll see a lot of different artists there. There are a lot of artists that are not really well known. One artist that is well known that I like is Jan Vermeer. I like him a lot. I like the paintings of the British, like John W. Waterhouse or Frederick Leighton, who did The Painter's Honeymoon. So Victorians or pre-Raphaelites. There are, let's see, other big painters that I like. Painters from the neoclassical period in art history, like Jacques-Louis David. Other minor painters like François Gérard. So there are a lot of not very well-known painters. My favorite sculptor is Michelangelo. I like Gian Lorenzo Bernini too, very dramatic stories. But that's just a taste. Oftentimes, if you come on my tour tomorrow, I'm not even going to tell you the artist's name, but I like the purpose of why you're asking for the artist's name. It's not to check, oh yes, I knew that was a Monet. It's more, I like this and I want to find more, and that's a really valid reason for doing that. But yeah, if you want, we can chat a little bit more about those.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Maybe I missed something, but my understanding is you don't make art.
Yeah.
I'm wondering why. I'm also wondering what you think an artist should do to make good art if it is to make it readable and make it personal.
Ooh, okay. I might ask for clarification on the second question, but the first question, why don't I make art? I took some drawing classes in college and a painting class, and I said, wow, that's nice, but you know what? I think I like the analysis part of things more. I like to think about what I'm thinking about. And oftentimes with art, it's a little bit more on the creative side, and maybe it's not something I got naturally drawn to do. So your second question, would you repeat that one more time?
I'm wondering if what an artist should do to make their art good is to ensure it is readable in some way,
Yeah.
and to make it personal to themselves.
Okay. so if I were an artist, the thing that I would say is, okay, what's going on in my life right now? It's actually the same way that I approach art museums and picking out art. What's going on in my life right now that I want to process or I'm having some insight on, and I get excited about putting it into a concrete form. What would be a quick example? Like, this is the first time I'm giving like a stage talk. You know, and if I were a painter, I might, okay, what does somebody who's really nervous on stage look like? And then I might paint that. And that might be both really personal, but also universal because it's an experience that other people have had. I would say start with your personal experience. Focus on you and what you're going through. See it clearly for yourself. And then afterwards, see what people think. And if they bond with it, then you've got an artwork that other people will like. There's some artworks that I like, and you know, I can kind of imagine that I painted it because I like it, that other people don't like. It's not fitting with what they're going through in their life. So start with yourself, I'd say.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. I think this might be the last question. Yeah.
So my question is when initially you showed us all those artworks, I was attracted to a lot of them. But one that you showed that you were inspired by was The Birth of Venus. And when I looked at it, it completely did nothing for me. Maybe I was sitting too far back, I don't know. But when you read your reading of it, I was really inspired by it, and I got the value that you got out of it, and I felt like I was sharing that with you. And I really wish, I had spent more time with it. Are there suggestions that you have for how do I know like when I need to spend more time reading an artwork or that kind of thing?
Okay, so first of all, when I'm going through an art museum, I do use my first impression judgment, like, oh, that's attractive and that's not. But oftentimes that can be deceptive because often your first impression is based on the visual aspects. I like strong contrasts of light and dark or streaks of light. I like very focused on figures and large images of faces and so forth. But I've had plenty of times the experience of an artwork that I ignored. In fact, I said no, that's not for me, that I went back to later on and became deeply meaningful because of identifying with the moment and the story in it. So I would say maybe, and this is maybe something I need to think more about, two things. One, give an artwork a chance. Go through the reading process. Understand that reading an artwork is distinct from your first impression. It's like meeting people. You might say, oh, that person looks like a jerk. But then you go up and you talk to them and you get to know them and you ask them questions and you realize, yeah, you have a bond. The second thing would be take recommendations. Ask, what did you get out of it? And especially this happens with people that don't like the artwork. Like I like to go into art museums and say, okay, what did you react to? And I said, what? I didn't like that one. But okay, I'll go and I'll give it a chance. And because artwork deals with human beings, there is a universal meaning that can apply to everybody. And it might not be the thing that you especially need now to fuel yourself, but it can be something that you personally connect with to some degree.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's all the time. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll be around here or outside for books.